You think war is all about glory and honor? Think again, mate. Let me tell you something that'll really make your skin crawl. The Napoleonic Wars weren't just fought on battlefields with muskets and cannons. Oh no. Every single night, in those filthy camps scattered across Europe, soldiers fought another war entirely. A war you couldn't win with a bayonet or courage. A war against creatures so small they could drive a grown man absolutely mad. Picture this. You're a French grenadier, bone-tired after marching 20 miles in worn-out boots. Your feet are bleeding, your uniform soaked through with sweat, and God knows what else. All you want is to collapse and get some shut-eye. But here's the kicker. Your bed isn't waiting for you like some cozy inn back home. Your bed is the cold, hard ground, and you're not sleeping alone, friend. Not by a long shot. The moment you lay down, the real battle begins. First, let's talk about lice. These little bloodsuckers were everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Soldiers called them arithmetic because they multiplied so damn fast. You'd pick 50 off your shirt in the morning, and by nightfall, you'd have 100 more setting up shop in the seams of your uniform. Can you imagine that? Constantly itching, scratching until your skin's raw and bleeding. But you can't stop because the itch just keeps coming back. Here's what really gets me. These weren't just annoying little bugs. Lice carried typhus, what they called camp fever back then. Typhus killed more soldiers than bullets in some campaigns. You'd see a healthy man one week, and the next, he's shaking with fever, covered in a rash, talking nonsense. Within days, he'd be dead. All because of a creature smaller than a grain of rice. Ain't that a kick in the teeth? British soldiers had their own name for lice. Chats. They'd spend hours every day chatting, which meant sitting around picking lice out of each other's uniforms like a bunch of monkeys. It became this weird ritual, you know? Guys would sit in circles, checking each other's clothes, crushing lice between their thumbnails with this satisfying little pop. Gross, right? But what else could they do? The officers tried to keep things clean, but it was like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. They'd order uniform inspections, tell the men to boil their clothes, but when you're on campaign, marching through mud and rain, sleeping in ditches, there's no keeping anything clean. The lice always won. Now let's move on to fleas. Oh boy, the fleas. If lice were bad, fleas were downright diabolical. These jumpy little devils could leap 2 feet in a single bound. That's like a human jumping over a skyscraper. They'd hide in the straw mattresses, in the blankets, in the cracks of wooden bunks. When you finally laid down after a brutal day, they'd throw themselves a feast on your flesh. What really grinds my gears is that you couldn't even see them coming. At least with lice, you could spot them crawling around. But fleas, they'd bite you in your sleep, leave these angry red welts all over your body. You'd wake up looking like you'd been pelted with buckshot, scratching yourself raw before you even opened your eyes. And here's the thing that'll really make you squirm. Flea bites weren't just itchy. They could give you diseases too. Ever heard of the Black Death? Yeah, that plague was spread by fleas. Now, the plague wasn't as common during the Napoleonic Wars, but other nasty infections were. A simple flea bite could get infected, turn into an abscess, and if you were unlucky, cost you a limb or your life. All from something you could barely see. Doesn't that just make your blood run cold? Soldiers tried everything to get rid of fleas. They'd shake out their blankets, burn straw, even rub tobacco on their skin because someone said it helped. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The fleas just kept hopping, biting, breeding. They were unstoppable. But wait, we're not done yet. Let's talk about the real nightmare fuel. Rats. Rats in Napoleonic camps were as common as soldiers, maybe more so. These weren't your cute little pet rats either. These were big, nasty, aggressive rodents that feared nothing and no one. They'd scurry through the camps at night, bold as brass, looking for food. And if they couldn't find food, well, sleeping soldiers were fair game. I'm not pulling your leg here. Rats would actually bite soldiers while they slept. There are accounts of men waking up screaming because a rat had nibbled on their ear or their fingers. Can you wrap your head around that? You're exhausted, finally drifting off despite the lice and fleas, and then bam! A rat decides your nose looks tasty. One soldier from the British 95th Rifles wrote in his diary about a night when rats ate through a comrade's haversack and devoured all his rations. The poor guy woke up to find nothing left but crumbs and rat droppings. That was his food for the next 3 days, gone. Just like that. What do you think you'd do in that situation? Wouldn't that drive you up the wall? Rats weren't just annoying though. They were dangerous in ways that'd make your hair stand on end. They carried diseases, lots of them. Leptospirosis, hantavirus, rat bite fever. If a rat bit you and the wound got infected, you could lose a finger, a hand, or worse. And in those days, medical care was pretty much amputate it and hope for the best. The camps were perfect breeding grounds for rats. Everywhere you looked, there was garbage, food scraps, human waste. Sanitation was a joke. Latrines were just ditches dug near the camp, and they'd overflow when it rained. The smell alone could knock you flat. Rats loved it. They'd feast on the filth, grow fat and bold, and multiply like crazy. Soldiers tried to fight back. They'd set traps, organize rat hunts, even train their dogs to catch them. Some regiments would compete to see who could kill the most rats in a night. But for every rat they killed, 10 more took its place. It was a losing battle. Let me paint you a fuller picture of what sleeping in these camps was really like. Forget everything you've seen in movies with neat rows of white tents and soldiers sleeping peacefully. The reality was chaos. Most soldiers didn't even have tents. They'd sleep in the open, wrapped in a thin blanket if they were lucky. When it rained, and it rained a lot in Europe, they'd wake up in puddles, shivering and soaked to the bone. The ground would turn to mud, thick and sticky, and you'd have no choice but to lie in it because there was nowhere else to go. If you were fortunate enough to be billeted in a barn or a house, you weren't much better off. Those places were crawling with vermin too. Straw in barns was absolutely infested with fleas and lice. Wooden floors had cracks where rats nested. You'd think having a roof over your head was a blessing, but sometimes it just meant being trapped with the pests. The noise at night was unbelievable. Snoring, coughing, men groaning in pain from wounds or sickness, rats squeaking and scurrying, the sound of scratching, endless, maddening scratching as hundreds of men tried to relieve the itch of bug bites. It'd drive you batty, wouldn't it? And the smell. Lord, the smell. Unwashed bodies, rotting teeth, infected wounds, overflowing latrines, damp wool, horses, gunpowder residue. It all mixed into this unholy stench that you could never escape. It soaked into your clothes, your hair, your very skin. After a few weeks on campaign, you couldn't even smell it anymore because you'd become part of it. Now here's something that'll really get under your skin: the psychological toll. Imagine never getting a good night's sleep. Never. Every single night for months or even years. You're waking up multiple times, scratching, swatting, checking for rats. You're exhausted all the time, but you can't rest because your own bed has become a battlefield. Soldiers would go mad from it, literally. The constant irritation, the lack of sleep, the diseases, it broke men just as surely as cannon fire. You'd see tough veterans, guys who'd face down cavalry charges without flinching, reduced to tears because they just couldn't take the itching anymore. Isn't that something? Officers had it a bit better, sure. They might have a proper cot, clean sheets more often, servants to deal with their laundry. But even they weren't immune. Lice, fleas, and rats didn't care about rank. Napoleon himself dealt with lice. Wellington probably woke up to flea bites. No one was safe. Let's talk about what soldiers tried to do to cope. Some men would sleep sitting up, thinking it'd keep the rats away. It didn't work. Others would wrap themselves completely in their blankets, creating a cocoon. That just meant they'd suffocate in their own heat and wake up drenched in sweat with lice having a party in the folds of the fabric. Some regiments tried to enforce cleanliness rules. Weekly uniform boiling, daily inspections, punishments for soldiers who were too lousy. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with a broom. You could be clean in the morning and covered in lice by evening just from standing next to your mates in formation. The winter was both better and worse. The cold killed some of the bugs, which was a relief. But then you had the challenge of trying not to freeze to death. Soldiers would huddle together for warmth, which just meant sharing body heat and lice. You couldn't win. Summer was a nightmare in a different way. The heat made everything worse. The bugs bred faster, the camps smelled worse, and trying to sleep when you're sweating buckets with insects crawling all over you? That's enough to make anyone lose their mind, don't you think? Here's a question for you. Would you have been able to handle it? Could you march all day, fight a battle, and then try to sleep in conditions like that, knowing you'd have to do it all again tomorrow? The food situation didn't help matters either. Rations were often spoiled or infested before they even reached the soldiers. Hardtack biscuits would have weevils in them. Meat would be crawling with maggots. Soldiers would joke that at least the bugs added protein. But really, what choice did they have? Eat the buggy food or starve? Water was another problem. Clean water was scarce. Men would drink from streams that animals had wallowed in, that other soldiers had washed in, that corpses might be rotting in upstream. Dysentery was rampant. You'd have half the camp running to the latrines at any given time, weakened and dehydrated. And when you're that weak, the lice and fleas and rats just seem even worse. Medical knowledge back then was primitive at best. Doctors didn't understand disease transmission. They didn't know that lice spread typhus or that rats carried plague. They'd treat symptoms, but they couldn't prevent the causes. A doctor might tell you to keep clean, but he couldn't explain why or how to actually accomplish it in campaign conditions. Some of the cures were worse than the afflictions. Mercury was used to treat various conditions, including skin irritations from bug bites. Mercury poisoning would make your teeth fall out and your brain go fuzzy. Some soldiers were given tobacco to chew or smoke, thinking it'd help with parasites. It just gave them different health problems. Want to know what really takes the cake? Even after battles, when men were wounded and lying in field hospitals, the bugs didn't give them a break. Wounded soldiers, unable to move or defend themselves, would be absolutely covered in lice and fleas. Rats would gnaw on bandages. Imagine recovering from a musket ball to the leg, only to get typhus from lice or an infection from rat bites. Doesn't that just make you want to scream? The worst part, and this is what really gets me, is that the soldiers knew it was killing them. They could see their friends dying of fever, wasting away from disease. They knew the bugs were part of it, but they were powerless to stop it. That feeling of helplessness, that knowledge that an enemy you couldn't even properly fight was slowly destroying you, that's horror on a different level. Letters home from soldiers rarely mentioned the glory of battle. They talked about the bugs. They talked about the filth. They talked about wanting nothing more than a clean bed and a good night's sleep. One French soldier wrote to his mother, "I would trade 1,000 victories for one night without lice." Can you feel the desperation in those words? The British had a saying, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." But the truth is, many old soldiers did die, not from wounds but from diseases carried by these tiny invaders. Typhus, dysentery, infected wounds. These claimed more lives than all the battles combined. And here's something that'll really blow your mind. This wasn't unique to the Napoleonic Wars. Every war up until the 20th century was like this. The American Civil War, the Crimean War, World War I, soldiers in all of them fought the same war against lice, fleas, and rats. It wasn't until modern medicine and understanding of disease transmission that armies finally started winning the battle against these tiny enemies. So next time you see a painting of Napoleon's Grand Army marching in perfect formation, looking all heroic and magnificent, remember what's hiding under those fancy uniforms. Remember the itch they couldn't scratch, the sleep they couldn't get, the invisible enemy that never stopped attacking. The daily battle in a soldier's bed during the Napoleonic Wars wasn't just unpleasant, it was a form of torture that lasted for years. It stripped men of their dignity, their health, and sometimes their sanity. And unlike the battles they fought during the day, this was one war they could never truly win. Makes you appreciate your clean sheets and bug-free bedroom a whole lot more, doesn't it? So I ask you, after hearing all this, do you still think the Napoleonic era was all about romantic charges and heroic last stands? Or do you see it for what it really was? A grueling, filthy, miserable existence where soldiers fought for their lives every single night against enemies they couldn't even see? The glory of war looks pretty different when you're lying in the mud, covered in bug bites, listening to rats scurry around your head, doesn't it? That's the real story they don't put in the history books. That's the truth of what it meant to be a soldier in Napoleon's time. And brother, that truth is enough to make anyone's skin crawl.